Why realizing nobody cares about you sets you free, Sartre. Imagine this: you're walking down the street, and for a brief moment, you catch yourself adjusting your posture. You become aware of how you look, how you're walking, how your clothes fit. You wonder if people are watching. You want to appear confident, composed, maybe even impressive. But here's the truth, and it hits like a quiet earthquake. Nobody is actually paying attention to you. Not in the way you think. Not in the way you desperately want. And for a lot of people, that realization is crushing. But for others, for those ready to walk into the deeper territory of existence, it's liberating. Utterly, radically freeing. Because if nobody truly cares, then you are no longer bound by the exhausting prison of performance. You're free to be. This is the core of the existential insight that Jean-Paul Sartre gave us. His philosophy, often misunderstood as bleak or cold, is actually a fierce invitation to live authentically. Sartre didn't want to depress you, he wanted to wake you up, to shake you out of the illusion that your life is being constantly watched, judged, and evaluated. In fact, he wanted you to see the opposite, that the world is utterly indifferent to you. And once you accept that, the chains fall off. You stop living for them, because there is no them. You start living for what's real, what's yours. We spend so much of our lives building identities for other people. We construct whole narratives: what we do, what we wear, what we say, not based on who we are, but on how we want to be perceived. And yet, here's the paradox: everyone else is doing the exact same thing. They're not watching you. They're too busy wondering if you are watching them. It's a hall of mirrors, and nobody's really looking. And once you see it, you start to feel the edges of something terrifying and beautiful, the realization that your life is entirely your own. But let's not skip to the comfort too fast. Let's sit in the discomfort of that reality. Because when you first realize that no one is truly invested in your story, your success, your failure, it can feel like an existential void. We want to matter. We want to be seen. We want applause, recognition, even envy. And the idea that most people are too absorbed in their own drama to care about ours feels like a betrayal. But it's not. It's a gift. Because if no one's watching, then the stage is yours. And you can finally stop performing.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Sartre believed that we are condemned to be free. That phrase sounds harsh, but it's one of the most important lines in all of philosophical literature. We are not born with a script. There is no divine director handing us a role. We arrive, naked and unformed, and we must choose who to be. That's freedom, but it's also terrifying, because with freedom comes responsibility. You can't blame the audience for your choices when the audience was never really paying attention. So we build illusions. We imagine that people care more than they do. We invent expectations. We dress ourselves in roles like armor. We become the productive worker, the cool friend, the perfect parent, the ambitious entrepreneur. But all of these masks are formed in relation to a crowd that isn't even looking. And deep down, we know it. That's why it exhausts us. That's why it never feels like enough. Because we're trying to win a game that doesn't exist. This is where the philosophical rubber hits the road. If nobody cares, then why are you still afraid? Why are you still holding back? Why are you still editing yourself, shrinking your voice, doubting your instincts? Sartre would say it's because you haven't yet faced the full weight of your freedom. You're still hoping someone will come along and validate your direction. But they won't, and they can't, because they're not you. Now ask yourself a question that most people will never have the courage to ask. If I knew with absolute certainty that nobody cared about what I do with my life, what would I do differently? Sit with that. Let it sink in. Would you still chase the same goals? Would you still try to prove yourself in the same ways? Would you still wake up with the same urgency, the same anxiety, the same need to be seen? Or would you finally slow down enough to ask, what do I actually want? That's the doorway. That's where the real work begins. Because if nobody cares, then you are free to care about what matters. Not to them, to you. You are free to build a life that doesn't need to be admired to be meaningful. You are free to walk away from scripts that were never written for your soul. You are free to fail beautifully, to succeed quietly, to create, to rest, to scream, to vanish. You are free to live a life that belongs only to you. And the irony is, once you start doing that, once you embrace the fact that nobody cares, you begin to radiate something few people ever find: authenticity, presence, power. Not the kind that's handed to you, but the kind that comes from owning your existence, not performing it. The I that isn't there, how the illusion of being watched controls us. There's a moment in every life where you start to wonder, who am I doing this for? Not in a poetic, motivational sense, but in the raw, sleepless kind of way, lying in bed at 2 a.m. After a long day of checking boxes, performing roles, smiling on cue. You ask yourself, who is this performance for? And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of us are living our lives under the gaze of an imaginary audience. We have internalized something that Sartre called the gaze of the other, this deeply embedded sense that we are always being watched, evaluated, and defined by people around us. But what if that I isn't real? What if the prison you're in has no walls, no guards, just the illusion of surveillance and the fear of judgment that keeps you from ever walking out? This is where Sartre's philosophy becomes almost surgical in how it cuts through the noise of modern life. He argued that we become hyper-aware of ourselves when we imagine someone else is watching us. We start to see ourselves from the outside. That's what the gaze does. It turns you into an object. You stop being and start appearing. You're no longer simply you, you're now a version of yourself edited for consumption. And here's the tragedy, we do this even when no one is watching. We carry the gaze of others in our heads like ghosts. We perform for standards that no one set explicitly, but we all seem to agree on. Think about how much of your daily life is shaped by this invisible I. The way you walk into a room, the way you post on social media, the way you talk about your goals, the way you hesitate before saying something honest in a conversation. You're not just living, you're curating yourself. You're managing your image. And who's it for? Not for your closest friends, not even for your enemies. Usually, it's for a vague collective, the they we never define but always fear. What will they think? How will they see me? Will they laugh? Will they admire me? But here's the brilliant and devastating twist. They don't exist. The I isn't real. It's a projection, a fiction. And yet, it controls us more than any government, family, or institution ever could, because it's inside us. And that's the genius of the illusion. It doesn't need to be enforced. It's self-sustaining. We do it to ourselves. Sartre believed that this illusion is what traps us in bad faith. It's when we lie to ourselves to avoid the anxiety of freedom. We create identities that are easier to wear than to question. We become the good student, the reliable employee, the charming friend, not because those roles fit, but because they're safe. They're recognizable. They make us legible to the gaze. But in doing so, we abandon our own becoming. We live as if we are fixed, stable, defined, and we forget that we are, in fact, free. Ask yourself, what would you say if you knew no one was listening? What would you create if you knew no one would ever see it? Who would you become if there was no one left to impress, no one left to disappoint? These aren't hypothetical questions. These are the keys to your actual self, and yet they remain buried under layers of performance, fear, and illusion. And here's where everything flips. Once you realize the eye isn't real, once you see that the gaze is a ghost, you begin to act differently. You stop asking for permission. You stop waiting for applause. You stop living as a reflection of other people's expectations. You start doing things because they matter to you, not because they'll be liked or retweeted or admired, but because they're true. And in that moment, you don't just reclaim your time, you reclaim your soul. This doesn't mean you become selfish or reckless. It means you become sovereign. You become the author of your life, not the actor in someone else's imagined narrative. You choose your values. You define your success. You create from a place that cannot be touched by judgment because you've stopped living for the gaze. You've stopped trying to be seen, and paradoxically, that's when you become visible for the first time, because people can feel when someone is real, when someone is no longer performing. It's magnetic, it's rare, it's dangerous to systems that rely on conformity, and it's contagious. The moment you stop being afraid of the eye that isn't there, you give others permission to do the same. You become a mirror not of judgment, but of freedom. The weight of freedom, why being uncared for makes you limitless. Freedom is a beautiful word until you realize what it actually means. We think we wanted total freedom, pure autonomy, the ability to choose our lives without interference. But when it arrives, when we catch even a glimpse of it, it doesn't feel like liberation. It feels like weight, like standing at the edge of a cliff with no map, no guide, and no one to blame. And this is precisely where Sartre's insight hits hardest. When you truly accept that nobody cares, when you internalize that you are not the center of anyone's universe, you are free. But that freedom is not light. It's heavy, because now everything is on you. When people care about you in a shallow or performative way, they also control you. You start living in response to their expectations. You shape your days around their opinions. You aim for approval, not authenticity. But when you realize that most people are too lost in their own chaos to truly care about yours, something cracks open. At first, it feels like loneliness, even grief. You mourn the idea that someone else was going to validate your path, give your life a stamp of meaning. But then, something deeper settles in. Nobody's coming. And that means you're already here. You're the one you've been waiting for. That's terrifying, because it means there are no excuses left. You can no longer say, I would have done it if they supported me, or I didn't try because no one believed in me. Those illusions dissolve the moment you realize nobody is watching closely enough to care either way. And now you're left with the raw material of lifetime, choice, and responsibility. That's the way to freedom. And it's both a curse and a calling. Sartre didn't sugarcoat this. He said we are abandoned in the universe, no divine script, no cosmic parent, no ultimate judge. It's just us, alone, radically free, and fully responsible. And while that might sound bleak, it's actually the birthplace of power. Because once you stop outsourcing meaning to others, once you stop waiting for someone to care enough to tell you what to do, you can finally begin to create a life that is yours in the deepest possible sense. Here's the paradox. The moment you accept that no one truly cares about your life, your dreams, or your purpose, you start to. You stop performing and start listening. You stop chasing and start choosing. You realize that the only person who has to believe in your vision is you. And when that switch flips, when you take full ownership of your freedom, you become unstoppable. Not because it's easy, but because you're no longer pretending it's not up to you. Ask yourself, what decisions have I postponed because I was waiting for someone else to approve them? What dreams have I abandoned because I was afraid they wouldn't be recognized? And what version of myself have I buried because I wasn't sure it would be accepted? These are the questions that surface when you let go of the need to be cared for. And in their place, you find something stronger than validation, conviction. Freedom is not the absence of limits, it's the presence of self-authorship. It's the power to write your own narrative, knowing full well that no one else will write it for you. It's the courage to stand in the blankness of possibility and say, "This is mine. This is what I choose." And yes, it's heavier than following someone else's path. But it's also infinitely more real. And here's the wildest part. When you embrace this kind of freedom, when you stop needing others to care, you paradoxically become more connected. Not through dependence, but through truth. People are drawn to those who are rooted in their own agency. They sense the integrity. They feel the groundedness. They trust it. Because most people are starved for that kind of authenticity. And when they see it in you, it reminds them of what's possible in themselves. So the next time you feel the sting of being uncared for, don't retreat. Don't shrink. Lean in. Let it strip away the illusions. Let it reveal the space where your real life is waiting to begin. You're not here to be watched. You're here to be. You're not here to perform. You're here to create. And once you stop needing to be cared for, you stop being controlled. That's the way to freedom, but it's also the root of power. The final liberation, living as if no one is watching because they aren't. There's a kind of life that only begins after the performance ends. After the masks are dropped, the scripts discarded, the pretend audience dismissed. It's the life we were meant to live before we were taught to be palatable, manageable, and predictable. Sartre's philosophy doesn't just deconstruct the illusion of being watched, it invites us to step off stage entirely, and to live not as if no one is watching, but because no one is. And that's not a tragedy. That's liberation. That's the moment you stop being a character and start becoming a creator. Most of us are haunted by the silent judge in our minds. That internal audience we've crafted over years of socialization, school, work, media, and culture. It's always there, whispering, "Don't say that. Don't wear that. Don't try that. What will they think?" But what if you finally realized that the audience is imaginary? That the people you're afraid of impressing or disappointing are too busy with their own fears to be watching you? Suddenly, the whisper loses its power. And in the quiet that follows, something sacred emerges, your own voice. This is the final liberation not from society or systems, though those are real, but from the self you've constructed to survive them. It's the difference between a life of constant reaction and a life of deliberate action. When you no longer live for the gaze, you begin to act from the core. Your desires aren't filtered through judgment. Your creativity isn't diluted by fear. Your identity is no longer a negotiation, it's a declaration. But let's be clear, this kind of living requires courage, radical courage. Because it means walking away from the safety of consensus. It means risking misunderstanding. It means being willing to be weird, wrong, quiet, loud, brilliant, boring, whatever truth demands in the moment. It means accepting that there will be no applause, no guaranteed reward, no ultimate affirmation, and still choosing to show up fully. Ask yourself this: what would your day look like if you truly believed that no one was watching? Would you still wear the same clothes? Speak the same way? Chase the same goals? Would you still be afraid to fail? Or would you finally breathe? Finally try? Finally allow yourself to be seen not by others, but by yourself? That's the irony. True visibility doesn't come from being watched. It comes from being honest. It comes from stripping away the layers of performance until what's left is raw, real, and undeniable. And in that space you find something no audience could ever give you: peace. Because you're no longer negotiating your existence. You're inhabiting it. And here's the strange and beautiful twist. When you live like no one is watching, people start to see you more clearly. Not because you're louder, but because you're real. Not because you're trying, but because you've stopped trying. And that kind of presence is magnetic. It can't be faked. And it doesn't need to be explained. So many of us are waiting for permission, and for the right moment. For someone to tell us it's okay to be who we are. But that moment never comes. Not because people don't care, but because they're waiting for the same thing. Everyone's looking at everyone else, hoping to find the courage they can't yet summon in themselves. But someone has to go first. Someone has to break the spell. Why not you? Why not live a life that's yours in every detail? Why not wear what you love? Say what you mean? Create what calls to you? Why not take the risk of being misunderstood in exchange for the reward of being free? Sartre showed us that we are not watched, we're seen, if at all, only in glimpses. And those glimpses are not what define us. What defines us is the choice to live deliberately, fiercely, unapologetically. To create a life that doesn't need validation to be valuable. A life that, even in its quietest moments, is yours and yours alone. No one is watching, and that's your chance to live.